Hey scholars, welcome to our first video lecture, and today we're talking about scientific method. So that's what we're going to look at. That's kind of the method that all scientists use in order to basically follow in order to figure out answers to questions. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. So let's take a look at scientific method. So what is a scientific method? The first thing we got to think about when looking at scientific method is what's the definition of it. So it is basically, the gist of it is a logical problem-solving technique. That's simple. You're trying to use logic, use a methodology in order to figure out the answer to a question. So logical problem-solving technique for the scientific method. The steps of the scientific method, there's 5 of them, very simple 5. And the first one starts with observation. The next one is problem statement. The third one is hypothesis statement. The fourth one is the experiment/data collection. And the final one is the conclusion. Now, I'm going to throw in a little disclaimer. In that experiment and data collection, you're probably going to want to analyze your data a little bit before you actually conclude. So those are the main 5. Now, if you guys ever need it, if you need to pause this video, make sure you pause this video to write everything down that you need to. By all means, take your time in watching the video. But those are our main 5 steps of the scientific method. So observation is our first one. Let's go over each one. And basically an observation is an observable, visible, and provable fact. And a lot of times you guys get this mixed up with a term that's called an inference, which is basically an opinion or a conclusion based on an observation or observed facts. So there's a little bit of a difference. An observation is a visible, provable fact. You can see it, you know it's there, you know exactly what it is. And an inference is basically an opinion based upon what you observed or an observed fact. So we're going to test this right now with you guys and see if you guys can figure out the difference between an observation and an inference. So I want you to take a look at this picture. Now, I want you to tell me, and I want you to write this down for me today. Go ahead and write down one observation or 2 observations that you see in this photo, and then write down an inference. Okay, we'll see what you guys come up with. Take your time and go ahead and pause the video now. And write down what observations, visible, provable facts you see from this video, and then maybe we'll get to the inference. Go ahead and pause the video now. All right, well, welcome back. Well, hopefully you guys did this, and your observations were very, very clear and concise. A couple of good observations would be that there are 2 fish in a bowl. Okay, that's an observation. Visible, provable, you can definitely tell. The next observation I could say is that there is some elevation to the area that this picture is being taken. You can see kind of the elevation lines there. A man is lying down. He's on the ground, laying on the ground. Another observation, visible, provable fact. Now, the inference is that the man is, and some people say he's dehydrated. That's an inference, because really, could he just be lying? I know I see his clothes are tattered. That's the fashion of the day. He could just be lying down trying to get a suntan. But so the inference that he is dehydrated, trying to get the water from where the fish are at, is an inference. But that's the difference between observation and inference. Let's try one more. So I want you to do the same thing. See if you guys can write down 2 observations, visible, provable facts that you can see from this picture, and then see if you can figure out what the inference is as well. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you guys figured out that the observation, there is writing on a chalkboard on the wall, specifically a picture of a missile on the wall. There is a missile, or at least the word missile, in the room. There are 2 men with lab coats. Those are observations. Now the inference that you're probably all getting at is that he is going to pop the bag, the man's going to hit the hammer too hard, and then boom goes the missile. That's the inference. But the reason why it's an inference is because what if the guy just came in and said, hey, I bought you lunch? And so what you're reading into it. You're using your observations when you're making a educated guess, or I guess an assumption as to what's going to happen next. That's what makes it an inference. So hopefully you guys got the gist between observation and inference. We're going to move on to the next step in the scientific method. In this case, it's the problem statement, or sometimes known as the problem question. And so it's usually a question, and it really compares variables. So for instance, as we observe, we want to question something. So an example would be, does the drop height affect the bounce height of a super ball. So I got my little super ball here. Obviously, I can bounce it, and I can play with it, and I can throw it around. My question is does it matter where I drop it? Does that actually affect how high the ball bounces? Okay, so that is our simple problem statement or problem question. So what are variables? We heard about that word variables in the last picture, and the variable is something that changes, hence the word vary in there, that prefix vary, so something that changes in the experiment. There are independent variables and there are dependent variables. We're going to analyze these two different types of variables, which you'll be responsible for knowing, and let's take a look at them. So an independent variable, lots to write down here, but if I were to summarize the independent variable, my independent variable is what the scientist changes, okay? What the scientist knowingly changes in this one. So it is, we as a scientist, I know the value of it because I'm the one determining the value. I'm the one changing it. In this case, in our question, does the drop height affect the bounce height of the super ball? The drop height is the independent variable because I'm knowingly changing where I drop it. So as a scientist, I'm manipulating or I'm changing the variable. So manipulated variable, independent variable, I'm changing it and I know what it is. That's what we call the independent variable. So on the contrary to this one, let's take a look at the dependent variable. The dependent variable actually in the word dependent is the one that depends on what the scientist changes. So it's kind of the outcome of what we're looking for, what we're trying to figure out in the experiment. So in this case, again, does the drop height affect the bounce height of the super ball? We do not know the bounce heights. We knowingly change where we're dropping it from, but wherever that ball bounces up, that's what is the dependent variable. That's what we're knowingly trying to figure out. So that is the difference between the independent variable and the dependent variable. The independent is one that scientists knowingly change, and the dependent variable depends on what the science does change. It's what the scientist is trying to figure out in the experiment. So those are our differences in types of variables. Now, one variable that's really not a variable at all, but it is a constant, is something that does not change in the experiment for the entire experiment. It's a value that stays the same. So in this case, does the drop height affect the bounce height of the super ball? It is the super ball. That does not change during the experiment because we're using the same ball to do all the different drops. So that is something that is a constant in our experiment. Now, the hypothesis statement. The hypothesis statement is the statement that expresses the expected answer to the problem statement. So in the gist of it all, it's kind of your educated guess towards what you think is going to happen. Okay? So, and it usually has a few words with it. It has an if and a then statement, and maybe even a because if you can really sum it up. So in this case, if the super ball is dropped from increasing heights, then the bounce heights will also increase because, and then a certain response to that. Mostly it's an if and then statement, and hopefully you can at least get that out of it, and that's how you know it's a hypothesis statement. Now comes our experiment. The experiment has to do a couple of things. Number one, it has to test the hypothesis to figure out if your answer or your educated guess was right to the problem statement or problem question. It also has to have a different way of collecting data and values of the dependent variable. It also has to compare those two variables, independent, the drop height, and the bounce height, the dependent. And also, the experiment can only test one variable at a time. Like, so I don't want to drop it with force. That would be force plus dropping at the same time. That's those two different variables. So you only want to do one variable at a time when you're looking at an experiment. All right, so our conclusion, after we analyze all of our data, after we make some graphs and take a look at some different things, then we might be able to summarize or make another inference based on our data, and then that way we can conclude. And the conclusion is not a very long, drawn-out thing. It's a very short, simplistic statement that basically tells the findings of the experiment, what the data shows, and if the hypothesis was supported or negated, correct or incorrect. And so that's the simplicity of the scientific method. So one other thing we forgot we're going to go back and talk about is in that data part are graphs. And a lot of times your teacher wants you to use graphs and things like that. Well, why the heck do we need to even use graphs? Well, first of all, graphs help us visualize numerical data. I don't know about you, but I don't look at numbers, a whole list of them, and be like, oh, I get it. I see graphs, though, and I'm able to understand. I make inferences based on looking at graphs. So there are several different types of graphs that we'll use in this class that you'll be able to use and also see and be able to know how to read. And these three are the bar graph, the pie graph, and the line graph. And so let's take a look at an example of each. So this is our first graph, a bar graph. And bar graphs are used to show comparisons of multiple objects. Now, there's a few problems with this one. This one says absences at city high schools, and it gives you days of the week. This also should be students absent. It doesn't label this axis, but it should. All axes should be labeled. The X and the Y both should be X and the Y should be both labeled as well as given a title, which it does have. So, if I were making an inference based on this, I would say that, you know what? Most likely people like to take long weekends. In high school, kids like to take long weekends with their family, either being absent on a Monday, which leads them Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or being absent on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, giving them an extra long weekend to travel or go do whatever they need to do. So that would be my inference based on my graph. Again, easily used in data. Another one is a pie graph, and pie graphs are used to compare parts of a whole. So in this case, this is Norman's trash, what his trash makeup is, and it gives it by percentages. So obviously I would infer that Norman wastes a lot of paper. He also does his yard quite often, has a lot of yard trimming. So those would be some of my inferences based on the graphs that I see. The line graph is probably the one that you guys will need to know the most and be able to read the most of. And it is used to show relationships between variables. In this case, this graph is a little bit off. It does not have a title, so I'm not sure what it's referring to, but I'm guessing it's milk because it has whole, low fat, and skim, all types of milk. And this is in pounds. Maybe it's consumption of milk throughout the years. Who knows? So if that was the case, I would say in 1970, not a whole lot of people liked skim milk, but in the 90s, it definitely jumped, almost doubled or tripled almost what people were drinking at the time as far as skim milk goes. And we've obviously seen a rapid decline in whole milk. Whole milk used to be very big in the 70s, but now has gone rapidly, declined rapidly all the way in 1995. So those are some inferences I would make by reading a line graph. Again, these are very, very important to know and important to utilize to help whoever the reader is of your scientific paper or just anybody looking at a graph understand your data a little bit better. So we're going to skip over some of these things, but what I would like for you guys to do now is I would like for you guys to think of a survey question that you could ask anybody in this classroom right now. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about a survey question you can answer. Here's an instance. This is my one. Don't have to use this one. But, you know, I would like for you to use something different. My question would be, what is your favorite pet? And I would list dog, cat, fish, or bird. I have 4 choices. You get to choose one and one only. Then I would go around and survey everybody. Now, knowing that I gave 4 choices, I could do this. I could do a bar graph, which would be very easy to do. I can make, a bar graph showing number of people that chose this. Or I could even do, if you surveyed the whole class, you could do a pie graph, like parts of a whole, because this is a whole classroom. So I want you to be thinking about your question, thinking about what kind of graph would you like to use in order to show your data. Okay? So I want you to go ahead and do that. Take the next 15, 20 minutes to not only think of a question, but go ahead and survey the class, and then go ahead and make your graph in your interactive notebook. This is the last little bit of our lecture for scientific method. We'll see you guys next time.